Can we just take some questions? Just say your name, please, if you would. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Jan. I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'll just try and pick a couple. So one of the ones I particularly wanted to ask is, have any of your research, has any of it focused on what attributes of the robot interaction walk into the uncanny valley and make things abhorrent and completely break that sensation of trust and relationship building?
So I think, with respect to the Uncanny Valley, I think a lot of the research right now that's working in that space is actually trying to understand and characterize the Uncanny Valley. So the Uncanny Valley is this conjecture that was originally posed by a Japanese researcher called Mori, where the hypothesis was that if you look at affective response, so liking or just like positive or negative affect, and human characteristics, that the idea is as you make various artifacts more anthropomorphic in nature, you get positive effect, and like Kismet is kind of in that area, this kind of cute mechanical cartoon sort of thing. But as you get close but aren't close enough, you plunge into the Uncanny Valley. And a lot of people probably say that the androids of today are kind of in the Uncanny Valley. I think if you look at, computer animation, if you look at Tin Toy, which is a predecessor of Toy Story, maybe even Toy Story itself, the human characters are in the valley. They're looking kind of zombie-ish in some sense. But then, as you get closer and closer, then you can pull out of the valley. And so like Shrek, for instance, you might argue that computer animation is finally out of that valley, where you can tell they're not real people, but they have an aesthetic unto their own. So this is called the Uncanny Valley. And then I think, again, this is a conjecture. People kind of throw this around like this is a fact, but it's really a conjecture. And it's applied not only to the way the artifact looks, but also to its movement, how it moves. And a lot of the research, or some of the research that's being done, say, with the android robots, is trying to really characterize what is this Uncanny Valley, how does it vary across age, across culture, across expectations. So I think it's much more in the trying to understand it stage. And there's probably just a lot of kind of personal preferences and biases as well. Somebody might see the androids and get really creeped out by other people might be okay with it, and that might be culture and personal preference and so forth. So, people are starting to look at fMRI studies and things like that to try to even understand like what's going on in the brain when you're observing these kinds of stimuli. So there's an effort to try to understand the Uncanny Valley. Right.
A lot of that will have to do with conditioning as well, though, won't it? If you're around something long enough, you get used to it.
Very possibly.
Anybody else want to ask any questions? If you just put your hands up, this gentleman here. If you just hang on till we get a mic to you, please, so everybody can hear you. Thanks.
Yeah, hi. I was at the lecture on Monday night titled Learning to Live with Our Planet, right? And there was less than half the number of people here. And I'm just trying to make just trying to figure out how it is that maybe can robots help us solve our economic crisis, or can they help us solve our environmental issues? It's all very it is fascinating because I'm interested enough to be here, but where are we going? Where do you see robots in our lives?
Sure. So I was talking about the sort of personal robot spectrum. Certainly if you look at the whole field of robotics, there's many, many, many applications, from scientific instruments that we send to planets to understand other planets, to environmental robots that are being sent out in order to measure and characterize our environment. So robots today, there have been famous under deep ocean exploration robots to try to understand and characterize the ocean. So, absolutely, robotics is playing a profound role in how we understand our planet and enabling us to capture data in a way that we couldn't do previously through large networks of robots or sensor networks and so forth. So, I think they absolutely are playing a role today in trying to understand our planet and informing courses of action. So if you implement a course of action, trying to understand the implications of that, in ideally even like real time, to be able to see, do we need to correct and so forth. So robots are absolutely playing a role in helping our planet and all kinds of things. I see robots as they're a technology. They're a technology that can be applied in all kinds of different contexts. And fundamentally, the reason why I do it and why people in robotics do this work is because we're trying to improve the human condition. We're trying to help people. So that's really it's what it's always been about.
But will you design an environmentally friendly robot? How are they fueled? How are they powered?
Well, many of
Currently.
them. Yeah, many of them are battery powered.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but many of them are battery powered. Sure. Yeah, rechargeable, battery powered. Yeah. And in fact, I mean, there's a lot of synergy right now going on between things that are driving mobile computing and alternative energy sources for cars and so forth that are feeding back and helping robotics as well. So there's a lot of kind of synergistic technologies that are being developed in a lot of different contexts that are helping advance the state of robotics.
Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jamie, and
Jamie.
as a hobbyist, I'm wondering which robot you think we should get for Christmas.
As a hobbyist, you know, it depends how old.
Well, like maybe for someone around 20.
20? Well, you know, Lego Mindstorms is still a classic. Got Toy of the Century. I mean, that's pretty good. Toy of the Century. So, you know.
But maybe a bit more advanced where you can actually do some soldering and programming.
Well, so Lego Mindstorms, you can do a lot of programming yourself. I mean, there's a new. So one of my colleagues, Mitz Resnick at the Media Lab, was actually a co-inventor of Lego Mindstorms. And he's gone on his next big project. It's called Scratch. And Scratch is a new programming language that's designed to make programming accessible to people of all ages. And what it allows kids to do is to create interactive games and tell stories and so forth through programming computers, but in a way that it's like building blocks. It's kind of like doing Legos, but it's computational blocks. And there are hundreds of thousands of kids and adults, too, actually using these systems. And there's an automatic translator so that you can build a program in Scratch in English, and then you can do a translation, and it could be translated into Chinese. And you can basically, like, it's kind of leveraging off of, like, you know, when the internet allowed you to take a web page and copy the code to design your own web page, these projects are being shared and building this big community so children or people can take one project, download it, adapt it, and make a new product. So there's a very kind of creative community going on, and I think the exciting thing about a lot of that is not just the community, but the sort of co-learning creative process that these kids are getting introduced to these technologies in a way that fosters exploration and creativity. That I think has appeal for people of all ages, actually. And it's a very big community right now. So I would encourage you look at Scratch and design video games and interactive experiences. So I think it's very cool stuff.
I was interested also when you were giving your talk, you said that the robots are going to be there to help us achieve our goals. Mm-hmm. Do you not think, though, that there is a very strong possibility that we're going to become redundant ourselves? And that who wants to go to work when you can send a robot out to do it for you?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, that's a very sort of, you know, 1960s notion, I think, of AI.
No, it's a very modern notion, actually.
You know, I don't actually think so. So especially when you talk about, you know, the elderly, it's really important that, you know, people maintain their sense of dignity and independence. So when I get old, the last thing I want is a robot that I just sit on my couch and have it do everything for me. I still want to cook my own meals. I still want to garden. I still want to do all the things that I do and enjoy in life.
That's a different
but
thing
I
to working.
might want something to be able to help me. So my point is just, I don't see these robots really as things that, you know, replace people. And I try to keep stressing that in my talks. It's really about empowering people. And the synergy and the partnership and the fact that, in many cases, the fact that these robots aren't human is what makes them so interesting because they have strengths and abilities that can complement our own abilities. So I view it really much as this partnership. How do you design robots to be partners for people in a way that they have their strengths and abilities and you have your strengths and abilities? And it's how can those come together to, again, you know, fundamentally it's about addressing human goals and human values.
I wonder, because I wish I could remember now where this research was done, but there was some work done not so long ago. 90% of people hate their jobs.
Well, that's really too
Why
bad.
on earth would you go
because
to work if you
I love
hate your job?
You know, I mean,
Send the
I think,
robot.
So that might be an example of if there's dull, drudgery type aspects of your work.
That's a huge
Maybe that
number.
makes sense that, you know, you offload those aspects to a machine and you let people do what people are good at, which is creativity and collaboration and so forth. So, I mean, people talk about computers in the same way. So thinking about what machines are good at, thinking about what people are good at, and just making sure that it makes sense what people, you know, are doing, I think. You know, leveraging our capacities so we feel, you know, more human and experience our humanity versus kind of downtrodden so we feel like machines, you know. I think that's often a criticism in technological
Do you look at a robot as a machine? How do you view it?
Yeah. But I think what I'm trying to challenge is our cultural
I saw your
notions
little eyes light up when you were showing
what
us
a
the
machine
pictures at the
is,
end.
right. I mean, I
When you
think
showed us Leonardo.
Fundamentally, it's a machine, but it's not a machine like your toaster. I think what I'm trying to do is challenge our notions of what machines are and what they could be. A lot of what my work is, and a lot of what, academia is trying to do is encourage us to think, to broaden the way we think, to broaden our ideas, to explore new territory. So I see these robots as being, in a technical sense, they're machines, but they're extending, I think, our notions of what machines are and what they can do.
Because when you had the learning robot, what was his name again?
The Leonardo robot.
That was Leonardo, excuse me, yeah. So Leonardo was there, and then when everybody saw him, when somebody walked into the room and said hello, everybody laughed. Everybody kind of cuddly little image of, it could be another little person there.
Yeah.
That could easily be, that area there could be very grey matter altogether, couldn't it?
Meaning?
In time, well, at the beginning it's a robot, because it's clearly a robot. And then as time moves on, well, it's not a robot anymore, it's my mate. And then as time moves on, I fall in love with it.
You're really in this kind of mate thing.
Did you not see?
There's something going on here.
Did you not see the Woody Allen movie all those years ago? Do you remember?
You're fixated on this.
No, I'm just curious. I'm curious to know where all this is going. Is there anything else with the question before I come back to you? Just to get as many people in as we can. Yeah.
Professor presented a problem at a philosophy of computing class that I took, and the question was, is it that we are computers, that we think? And I realized only recently that was an Alan Turing notion, is it because we are computers that we think? So that's what you're saying.
We're very complicated computers. This is something I was discussing with Cynthia today. I mean, for these things to go all the way, they'd have to become human. Almost, because you break a leg and all the knock-on effects that has if you break a leg. It's not just a broken leg, so physically it has to be fixed up. It's, oh Christ, I broke my leg, I won't be able to go to work tomorrow, I have to pay the bill, I have to go to the hospital, I have to queue up, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And where do the robots go?
I think there's a shift happening where, what we want to do, we're building these systems in order to try to understand people and looking at these theories. We're trying to design the systems to be compatible with people.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily trying to build these systems to be people, and it is to state the obvious. I mean, robots are not human, and they're never going to be. And when we talk about things such as the way that we think and our emotions, I mean, robots are not going to have human emotions because they're not human. It's like
or human flaws, perhaps.
If you look at other species like dogs and so forth, people attribute genuine emotions to dogs, but they're not human emotions; they're dog emotions. So I think the question that's raised here, the new question is, if robots can have emotion, what are robot emotions? In that sense of what makes sense within the context of the fact that these are robots. And certainly there's interpersonal aspects of that, and there's internal processing aspects of that. I mean, people in psychology are learning that emotion and cognition are deeply intertwined, and that human intelligence is characterized by that, deep intermeshing of what we consider to be kind of logical cognition and this emotional sort of intelligence. And I think from that standpoint, you could argue that it makes sense for robots to have these ways of thinking and understanding the world because they're really useful. So, but what does that mean for a machine? And I think similarly, you keep going to the relationship.
No,
I think
Obviously, I'm joking, just in case you were.
We don't know what the human-robot relationship is really going to be because they're not really around. I mean, we understand the domesticated animal, dog-human relationship because they've been with us for thousands and thousands of years. We tend to map them onto the relationships that we know because that's kind of the obvious thing to do. But I think in reality, it's going to be different kinds of relationships. And you're not going to have a human-robot relationship be like a human-dog relationship. It's going to be different.
But you've taken it a stage further. What animals lack, which is what humans have, is the ability to communicate vocally, to be able to speak to each other and understand each other. And what you're doing with these computers is you're giving them that ability and that facility. And that's where you've taken this a stage further.
Sure.
Because we know that the dog can fetch the paper. The dog knows when you're home. The dog can tell you when it wants to go for a walk.
And in many
because
ways,
it looks at the door or it looks at the tap.
In many ways, dogs are a lot smarter than these robots.
But
I just got to give a call out to the dog. The dogs are really smart.
But this is where you're taking this that stage further because it's going to lift its eyebrows. When you lift its eyebrows, it's going to, as a dog does. A dog can look sad too.
Sure,
a dog can dream. This has been proven already.
Dogs are very social animals.
Yeah, so this has gone beyond that already from what I've seen on the screen. Anyway, is there somebody else up there, yeah?
Yeah, you said earlier that you were that you couldn't do tests with humans, like disable eyes and mouths and all that. Are you planning on doing that with robots, like to find out what makes people like robots. Like, if you take out the eyes, will they dislike robots more?
Yeah, so I mean, again, if you look at the human psychological literature, you know that these cues such as eye contact and interpersonal distance and facial expressions all matter, but we don't know to what extent and how much. But yeah, we're starting to do a series of studies to kind of systematically vary those parameters and seeing how they impact people's perception of this. And that's going to be interesting not only for robot designers, I think, but also for people to think about, the impact of these cues and kind of like how much, impact they have on our perceptions. So yeah.
Do you want to ask a question? Can we get a microphone down to... What's your name? Philip. Philip wants to ask a question here. So.
What subjects do people have to learn in school to become a robot scientist?
You were looking at the robot, were you?
So if you look at the nature of work that I do, I mean, clearly there's a lot of technical aspects. There's a lot of engineering, mathematics, science, but you'll also notice there's a lot of sort of performance sides of it too. So the fact that I collaborated with Stan Winston on the creation of Leonardo, that its facial expressions, its way of expressing itself, I mean, that could be speaking to classical animation and so forth. So, all that you can know and learn is going to help you inform your ideas and how you think about and understand these sorts of problems and allow you to be creative and go beyond what's been done in the past. So I would never want to limit your curiosity in the subject matter that you're passionate about or want to learn about. But certainly, I mean, a lot of robot people are coming at it from a technical perspective. But you're starting to see, especially in this era of human-robot interaction, psychologists are coming into it as well from a scientific perspective. In the case of, Stan's stuff, he's coming at it from an artistic perspective. So I think all of these things play an important role of how the different perspectives and way of thinking about this sort of very rich space of possibilities.
Anybody else? This gentleman here. Thanks, Philip.
My name's Mike. I have a question about the mirroring effect, because you mentioned mirroring a lot in the beginning of the presentation, and I was wondering, because robots think using code, of course, so they get the stimuli, then they react, then they learn. Have you tried, for example, copying Leonardo or, making a more advanced version of Leonardo sit in front of a less advanced version of Leonardo and try the more advanced robot to make him teach the less advanced robot?
Mm-hmm. So we're starting, we have a very new project basically trying to look at that transfer question right now. So, and just, not even necessarily having the robot explicitly sort of do pedagogy to teach another robot, but what can you transfer from one robot, which might have a different embodiment even, to another system. So, there's a lot of interesting hard problems in succeeding in doing that, but we're starting to look at those questions as well.
And when they start recognizing their own images, robots.
There are people who've actually already started doing that.
Really?
Oh, yeah, recognizing itself in a mirror, sure.
That's extraordinary stuff.
Sure.
Because I know certainly from when birds do it, they attack.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating because in most species, eye contact is viewed as an aggressive thing. It's usually like either you run because something's going to eat you, or it's a kind of challenging, or it's a challenging sort of thing. So, humans are, we're very different in that eye contact is seen as this kind of pro-social sort of thing in many cases. Of course, it doesn't have to mean that. But many species are very sensitive to at least being watched. And there's a really good reason for that.
Anybody else? Up at the back?
Hi, sorry. I was just interested in your, when you had the robot in the medical environment. I'm just wondering, with this kind of reflective or empathetic, personality that's been built up, would you envisage their involvement becoming greater there, or maybe that they could recognize distress, or maybe that they could...
You're talking about in the hospital situation?
Yeah, or in any medical environment, in an ambulance or something like that, they could collaborate with the medical professionals.
No, there's a
we
whole...
could do with some help in this country with our healthcare.
I think they couldn't be any worse than some surgeons I've come across in my time.
There's a whole field called affective computing that basically is looking at that, giving computers and machines the ability to perceive human affective states either through observable facial expressions, tone of voice, but also through biophysical sensing. And that's really relevant in a lot of medical applications. It's relevant, in the cases, say, of people who are on the autism spectrum disorder, where in many cases they may have these very aroused internal states, but they're not expressing it through the same channels that we would expect from another person to see if you're stressed out. And so you hear examples of the teacher who is trying to teach someone something, but they're really stressed out, and then suddenly the person has an outburst, and they're like, suddenly it was an outburst, and it's like they're telling you once they become maybe later in life verbal, it was never a sudden outburst. It was building and building and building, and I didn't know why you wouldn't back off. And it's just, if you had systems that could interpret those signals and then have maybe an artifact, a robot or something that could communicate that, so a person would understand what's going on inside them. I think there's a lot of applications for stuff like that. Medical, therapeutic, just communication. I think there's a lot of interesting applications for stuff like that.
Including sensing danger. I mean, robots already can sense danger.
Sure.
You like the little warning device in the car, you're going to crash. Stop.
Sure.
I'm telling you, I'm screaming at you, stop. You turn it off, you crash. You made the mistake. Anybody else? Sorry, this lad down here, if we got a mic, please, Neil. Well, you could shout it out if you want.
So when you have one intelligence learning from another intelligence, you have robots, say, learning from a human. Did you ever find that when you were doing your experiments that the non-human intelligence did something quite intelligent but not just very human?
Did something quite intelligent but not human.
Something that human might actually think of doing but actually turns out to be quite intelligent.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so there are certainly examples of that. So I'm going to talk about some different work.
That's when you get worried. It starts doing stuff you don't expect.
There have been some really, kind of funny stories. When people were doing a lot of work with genetic algorithms, and they were building these sort of virtual worlds and involving these kind of virtual creatures. And what they found is that sometimes these virtual creatures would find a bug in your code, could exploit some artifact of your virtual world, like you didn't model gravity exactly right, and would exploit that to be able to do the task. So I mean, there are cases of, when these systems learn and they find these regularities, sometimes they find stuff that you didn't expect or predict and start using it. So in the case of these virtual creatures in the sort of genetic algorithm, they would start using kind of the violations of your laws of physics in order to solve the task of how to locate from point A to point B in like really funny ways, because it's completely violating what we know as physical laws. But I mean, I think that's certainly it's certainly possible. If it can sense it, if it's within a space of possibilities that it can search over and discover, then you could expect it to find things that might not necessarily be intuitive to us, but you can take advantage of.
We'll just take a couple more questions. So that man there.
Hi. I've got one question, but it's sort of half been answered by all the other questions that have come before. The first half of your talk effectively was a focus of psychology and the learning of how we learn, because you had to learn that first to try and apply those rules to help your robots to learn. At some point, have you got a measure of what it is to learn, and can you get a way of measuring when your creations can learn on their own, beyond yourself, what you've taught? Effectively, when will androids dream of electric sheep, to paraphrase a famous author? And what have you learned about yourself that you wouldn't have thought of from what you've been working on?
Yeah, so I mean, from a lot of the work that we're doing, I mean, so the one video I showed was Leo showing that, when a person's not nearby, it actually does have these internal drives to explore. It has essentially this sort of curiosity drive to try to discover the things that are new. So, if you look at, even Piaget, he talks about these multiple drives and motivations we have for learning. So we're both attracted to novelty, and we also have this sort of pleasure of mastery, and this sort of push-pull motive, so to speak, to discover the thing that you don't know yet, but also to master what's familiar. And that's basically a process that the robot's engaging in that video. Now, that being said, I mean, children learn in all kinds of ways that this robot is not learning in. And I think there's still a lot we have to understand about how children learn. So, machine learning is this huge field of inquiry, and the vast majority of that work is not inspired by how humans learn at all. It's a lot of statistical kind of number crunchy sort of things. And I mean, there's applications, and there's, these are things that computers are good at, and so it makes sense. I think a lot of the reason why we're building robots in the way that we are is because we want them to learn from people. So if you look at these sort of machine learning techniques, if you understand the algorithms, you can design the algorithm and kind of frame the whole problem that the algorithm basically at that point just kind of turns its crank and out comes the result if you as the human designer were smart enough to structure that appropriately. We're looking at a very different problem, which is someone who knows nothing about the underlying machine learning algorithms but has a lifetime of experience in teaching and learning from each other. What does that look like when you try to teach a machine? So that's why we draw so much from how people learn, because you're trying to make this process intuitive for people and also effective, that people bring so much insight and constraint and help basically to help people learn, to help children learn. And the spatial scaffolding, which is one example of this simple interaction that people automatically understand what the meaning of that is. Trying to design robots that can appreciate all of those cues that I threw up on that slide. I mean, that's a pretty daunting task. We were kind of highlighting this one particular one, but just appreciating that, learning on your own, even as people, we don't do that. If you leave an infant in a room alone, they don't learn. They can't.
But they explore.
Well, it depends how young. And there's cases of the Romanian orphanages where the children were basically just given the kind of biological needs, but they weren't socially interacted with, and they grew up to be just irrevocably, just severely retarded. I mean, so appreciating that our mind goes through all these critical periods, and we need these kinds of interactions, and many of them are profoundly social interactions to develop normally. So the social is critical for our cognitive and continued social development as well. The world is a really complicated place. I keep saying that, but I think we need a lot of help beyond just our own exploration to make headway. And that's why, ants basically don't have to learn a lot. And they kind of are born, with these certain knowledge, and that's what's going to get them through their ant day. Humans are what is called an altricial species, meaning that we go through this very long period of development where we're elderly dependent on our caregivers because we need that time in order to learn and acquire these abilities through the interaction with others. So, again, I think, machines can learn in very inhuman, non-biological ways, but I think it's intriguing and potentially really significant to build robots that can also learn in these more human-inspired
I think some of that
ways.
has to do with the lifespan, though. I mean, if you're a human, you're going to live longer than an ant. You're going to live longer than a mayfly, which lasts for a day. Comes up, it goes up, it gets mated with, it's gone. It's
Right,
all over.
sure.
So it only needs to know what it has to do for that moment, if it even knows it. Humans have a much longer lifespan.
Yeah. And we
what
have
kind
to
of,
deal with all
so we have to do a lot more. So it takes us a lot longer, but we learn it, and that's how we get through
Right.
it. But what about robots? How long? What's the kind of lifespan, or have you even thought about that?
Well,
when you
so
design
I
a
think
robot?
that's one of the big questions, is that right now, I mean, the reality of it is most robots, especially research robots, aren't on that long. There's manufacturing robots that are on 24/7, but they're just doing the same thing again and again. But learning robots, they're on, they don't really go through, I think, a life cycle. And I think long-term interaction and long-term learning, I mean, that's a grand challenge of the field right now, is how do you build a system that can go through these extended months, years types of interactions and really build and accumulate.
Because you go
this
into one room
ability.
where the robot is kind of like this, and then you go to another room where the robot is kind of like that, and then it's different stages, and depending on what your issue is that day,
Right.
or what the task is, you say these robots are designed to help you fulfill your goals. I mean, is it the baby one? Is it the kind of the adolescent? Is it the adult one?
Depends
Or is this
what
one
you're
that you
trying to
grow
do.
up with, that
Yeah.
grows up with you?
Depends
Or does
what
it come
you're
in
trying to do.
ready-made,
Yeah.
all ready,
I
does
don't know.
everything?
I mean, I think these are all, very fair questions that I don't think people, know the answers to yet. But I think certainly a grand challenge right now of robotics is looking at this long-term interaction and long-term learning, because it really hasn't been done yet.
Because if the baby is growing, Leonardo was teaching the kid in the room, and what did you learn today? Well, we learned this. And then does that robot grow as the baby grows?
Absolutely, to build. People call it, the ability to scale.
Yeah.
To become more complex over time without losing ability. Because you can imagine these systems become much more complicated. I mean, they could just
Well, you've done a version
get
of it already.
unwieldy. They could just, there gets to be a point where you're not constructively building upon things, but it's becoming, too sort of,
Well, it's kind of there in the
scattered.
obesity one, isn't it? Because you say that initially the conversation is more instructive, and then as it gets to know you almost.
Right, so based on, exactly. So the robot is actually taking, this is a very different kind of, it's not learning, I think, in the way that we're talking about children learning in that case. It's more of an adaptation. So every day the robot basically, as part of your interaction, is asking you a couple questions in some sense that is trying to measure what's the state of the relationship, meaning, is the working alliance working, or do we feel like it's going through disrepair? And then based on these measures, it's adapting the dialogue to either try to maintain the interaction, or also just based on just a internal clock of knowing how many times you've interacted with it. It has a measure, it has ways of basically computing how familiar are you with the robot, knowing what it's said to you in the past, and sort of appreciating the past interactions in order to gauge what it should be saying now. So when you talk about this life cycle and sort of relationships, I mean, the thing that it's bringing into it is time. When you build a relationship with something, you have a set of shared experiences, a whole history of past experiences that shape and inform what you do in the moment and shape and inform what you think about in the future. And the weight management robot is a really simple example of that. But, as you think about scaling that to more complicated systems, this idea of this longitudinal relationship is a really fascinating question.
One last question.
Thank you. My name is Alexei. Just wondering, what do you think, how far we are from a situation shown in the Blade Runner movie?
In Blade Runner?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is funny because I think you're the third person who's mentioned Blade Runner. And Blade Runner is a different technology. Blade Runner is genetic engineering. And maybe eventually I'll go to genetic engineering to do this kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's a different, it's just a fundamentally different technology that people are using there. Yeah, so it is work that's going on. It absolutely, genetic engineering is absolutely going on, but it's not my area of expertise. And, I couldn't even venture to guess, how close we are to doing that. But yeah, that's the science that's advancing very rapidly.
Well, Cynthia,
Absolutely.
on behalf of everybody here, I'd like to thank you for a very informative presentation. You've got a fabulous mind and a fascinating imagination, a fantastic imagination, as to say. So let's hear it for Dr. Cynthia Breazeal. Well, thank you very much indeed for coming in. That was super. Well done.